Podcast photos and stories. My name is Andrew Biraj, professional photojournalist, and sorry. My name is Andrew Biraj. I'm a professional photojournalist based in Washington, D.C. Photos and Stories is a social media live podcast on photography. In this fortnightly broadcasted live show, I have the privilege to invite legendary and successful professionals in the photography industry from all around the world. My purpose is to present behind-the-picture stories of the life and journey of these legends. Today, it's a great honor to present two-time Pulitzer winner, internationally renowned photographer, and a longtime friend of mine, Daniel Berehulak. Please welcome Daniel Berehulak. Hi, Daniel.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you wanna say hi again? I'm sorry, you're
Absolutely. Thanks. Hey, Andrew. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure, and it's nice to be talking again with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's my pleasure too. Thank you very much. It's a bit hot day in Washington, D.C. It's over 90 degrees now. And I believe you're in Mexico City now?
That's correct. Yeah. I've been living here for the last few years.
So how have you been, Daniel? It's been a long time, right?
It has been a long time. Everything's great. As everyone is experiencing, we're having our own experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic, and trying to do the best that we can, stay the safest that we can, and also for those of us who are reporting stories, trying to do the best that we can to tell stories around this time as well.
Awesome. I was watching one of your pandemic stories online too, and I think you have just published a new piece on the pandemic in Mexico City in New York Times, perhaps. So we will be talking about all of these things. What have you been? Where have you been around? Like we have seen you receiving 2 Pulitzers. One after another, and then you have been so many places, so it was really tough to track you to be honest. So a lot of our viewers are really interested on your pictures and very much inspired by your pictures too. So Daniel, I wanna go a little bit from the very beginning. You have covered the most significant stories of your life. One of the most significant, of course, the drug operations in the Philippines, Ebola crisis in Africa, aftermath of the earthquakes in Japan and Nepal, floods in Pakistan, war in Iraq and Afghanistan, funeral of Nelson Mandela, jade miners in Indonesia, and even Kumbh Mela and the cricket in India, and all of the new.
I love cricket.
I have also covered the cricket too. We are all on the same page. So, all over the world, more than 60 countries, right? So your pictures are not only compelling, but they play vital roles to shape the history. So, but I know that you have initially started as a sports photographer in Australia. So
that's right.
Yeah. So did you ever dream to become an international photojournalist from the very beginning, or what was your inspirations behind?
I did not. I had no idea that photography was a viable career. My parents were refugees from the Second World War from Ukraine. They lived in refugee camps in Germany before coming over on a boat. So with just their belongings. We grew up. My parents were hoping for me to maybe be a lawyer or a doctor. My grades ensured that their dreams were never realized because I wasn't that amazing student. But what I knew from the start was I grew up on a small farm. My dad was an engineer. I knew that I wanted to see the world. So from an early age, I was quite adventurous. I used to disappear at the age of 4 or 5 around our house on our farm, and my parents would freak out because I would be gone for hours. That kind of curiosity and adventure led to reading a lot of books, watching, reading National Geographic, a lot of adventure stories about the Amazon and Congo. And what I knew kind of growing up in Australia, I mean, I was hearing stories about all the hardships my parents went through with in the war, also under Soviet oppression. So there was a kind of this idea of like justice and injustice from an early age that kind of like always sat with me. It was only I played sport as well through college, so it was only when I was on one of these sporting trips in Vienna that I saw a World Press photo exhibit back in 1998. And I just remember, growing up in Australia, we're quite sheltered from the rest of the world. Yes, we get international news. My parents were connected with family in Ukraine. I was getting, we're getting news from Ukraine. So, but you really don't get an understanding of what is going on around the world and what people were experiencing. And when I saw the images in the World Press photo exhibit, they really hit home. And I just remember thinking, wow, there's so many things that are going on around the world that I have no idea of, that so many people have no idea. So I first started photographing, and an Australian photojournalist, Craig Golding, an amazing sports photographer, had won. And it was the first time that I saw that, wow, an Australian has won, a World Press Photo Award. That's incredible. And it kind of realized that there was a possible career behind it. It was around that time that we had a family tragedy as well. My sister passed away, so it really impressed on me. She'd been such a great inspiration in my life, and she'd impressed on me, to go and follow your dreams and get out there. So for me, I'd been working in retail for a number of years, for like 3 or 4 years after college, having played sport in college, and I quit within a week. And I knew that I loved photography. I'd started like doing night courses, reading photography magazines, buying books, just trying to immerse myself as much as possible. And I ended up photographing sport. I ended up photographing first volleyball, which I'll show you some of the first kind of photographs.
Sure. And what was the year for this? Like when?
This is 1999.
Okay.
So this is in the days of film. I'm not sure if you.
Is it very common for the Australian photojournalists to become a kind of a sports photographer in their initial career? Like I've seen a lot of photographers.
Yeah.
I see that Australia is very vibrant in sports. So
yes,
you cannot avoid this.
You can't escape it. Your sport is part of the curriculum when you're growing up in school, so it's something that's really integrated. There's a lot of outdoor sports. So yeah, I naturally kind of ended up kind of turning my lens on what I knew, which was I was playing volleyball. And I don't know if you can see the photograph that's up.
Not yet.
Not yet?
I'm sorry. Yep.
Okay, I probably need to do share screen.
Yep.
That might help.
Yeah.
All I knew was that I wanted to see the world. I wanted to experience more what was going on, and the most immediate thing for me was sport. I had the opportunity to play state volleyball. I played in Germany, in Lebanon, and Indonesia. I was very, very fortunate to have those opportunities. And during that time, I had a camera. I was taking photographs, terrible photographs, but I was shooting. So now I'm just about to share a screen of just some of the first kind of photographs.
Sure.
That.
Awesome. Great.
And so this is one of my
in the film era, right?
This is in the film area, and this is before you have an understanding of shutter speed and motion and movement and all of that. So sport for me was quite a defining moment. I would literally go shoot dozens of rolls of film and have to wait a week or two to develop them to get the kind of results back. But at that time, I was just out there. I started studying at college there at a TAFE in Sydney, New South Wales, and this was my first portfolio. I managed to talk myself into all of these events. So it was the year before the Olympics. So the great thing was that there were a lot of test events that were happening. So I was able to kind of get a pass for the gymnastics, get a pass for the athletics, and I was going as an amateur and just taking photographs. And I had no idea sort of about, capturing the moment or the specifications, of different films and all of that. So I was just going out and shooting.
Yep.
In 2000, I had the opportunity to shoot the Olympics.
Awesome.
And I had started freelancing for a very, very small agency, and one of their photographers got sick. So I was meant to be developing film at the Olympics, and I begged my boss, please give me the opportunity, please, 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 please. And finally he succumbed, and I was able to go and shoot the Olympics. So I'm sure he would regret that decision. But as you can see, I covered, they gave me volleyball to cover and a number of other sports. But yeah, I mean, it is photography, and I mean, everything for me. And I just want to kind of share with everyone that, photography isn't something that comes naturally. It was something that I, tried again, and made so many mistakes of, cutting out the ball, with the volleyball photo, everything on an angle, everything was kind of like, was off. And I remember asking one of the French photographers that we were working with, that year, like, hey, what's the secret? What's the success? These guys were amazing. They were doing multiple exposure photos of the gymnastics, creating beautiful shapes. And so I asked Laurent, one of the photographers, one night when we were having drinks, it's like, hey, what's the secret to becoming a great photojournalist? A great photographer. And I remember him leaning in, he dropped his cigarette down, and he looked at me and said, Daniel, you have to work. You have to work hard. And I just remember looking at him and just being dumbfounded, expecting him to say, like, follow the light or shoot Fuji Velvia film or something like that. I was looking for more. And it was only years later that I would actually really sort of come to understand what his words would mean. And what that meant was, getting up early. These are some photographs from my kind of earlier freelancing days when I went from the small agency, and then I started freelancing for Getty Images. And in Australia, we have a lot of sports, so I had the opportunity to photograph a lot of events. This was one event at the Davis Cup and Leighton Hewitt. Literally, I think I was shooting with a 400 mil, and it's one of those decisions that you have to make in match point, what lens to go for, and I decided to go for a tight lens, and he just jumped straight and completely out. I'm just going to go back out of my frame. And I remember going back to the room in Melbourne with all the photographers there, and there was this French photographer sitting, and he'd shot it with a 70-200, a lot wider, and he had this image incredible. And I just remember this photo so much because I cut off the foot, and you don't have the perspective of height, and it's an image, a painful image to see, but it's one of the ones that sticks in your mind, and you remember not to shoot too tight, to take into perspective as well the nature of the sportsman. We knew that he possibly might jump. So it was all these things that kind of like helped mold me as a photographer, and making so many mistakes. This is an image from the 2004 Olympics. So this is when I was slowly making a transition. I knew that I didn't want to cover sport. I'd been a sport photographer for 3-4 years now, working for a small agency, freelancing, showing my folio, and then getting an opportunity to shoot for Getty Images. So it was during that year that I spoke with my editors at Getty and said, hey, I'd really like to transition to news. I need to travel. I want to see the world. So I worked probably 63 days straight, leading up to, I decided to take a year out, and I knew that I had one assignment. I had organized to shoot the Athens Olympics in Athens.
Yeah, if you don't mind me interrupting you, me and you, we were in a conversation yesterday very briefly, and you were talking about the same thing, means working hard as a photojournalist. So it's very important. I think a lot of us maybe don't understand the exact meaning of how to work hard. And nowadays people say that rather than working hard, work smart too. So. And I've seen that you gradually, in your sports photography, you gradually started to work smart as well as as working hard too. I remember we covered T20 World Cup cricket in Dhaka. It was 10 years back, and I remember all the time, all of our photographers from AP Reuters, we were too much worried what Daniel is shooting. So
that's very kind of you.
Yeah, your frames, your photographs were so extraordinary, even in the sitting just side by side. So how did you master the sports photography? What was the key to?
I think the key was I had the opportunity to work with some of the best sports photographers in the world at the time. So we had Craig Golding, Tim Clayton, amazing photographers from the Sydney Morning Herald, Adam Pretty as well. He had just won his, I think, first World Press Photo in '99. An incredible sort of inspiration to my work, and just learning, watching, sitting next to photographers. I had the opportunity to sit next to them at the football, at the rugby league, and I remember shooting a match and then seeing the newspaper on the next day and just having my mind blown. And just the fact that we're a meter away from each other, and how someone's vision can be completely different. And it just kind of, you start learning about light, you start learning about what you're photographing, the sports you're photographing, the specific players, their characteristics, their emotions, and studying that. And this I know now looking back, but then I was just shooting, and my photographs were different. But I remember, clean backgrounds being really important, capturing the moments, being in the right place that you're preempting what is going to happen. You're preempting where whoever is going to be at that decisive moment. And you try to set yourself up to be ahead of time in that position with the cleanest background. I remember getting feedback from the guys, and I mean, I would hassle them. I would come with my terrible photos week in, week out, and I'd be, Tim, can you please have a look at these frames? And it'd be like, terrible, terrible, terrible. And Craig would look at them and go like, oh yeah, that's really interesting, but Daniel, I don't think that's your best work. So just seeing so many, I mean, I think following photographers, but also being next to them while they have taken incredible moments has really kind of helped. You get to see the kind of like the pathway of we're physically next to each other, but there's obviously something, there's that kind of like that vision and that database of, light coming, of knowledge of light, of movement, of shutter speed, and combining all of that to get the right moment. So I feel really, really fortunate to have sort of started in Australia with these incredible sports photographers, working next to them, and then going out and with my own curiosity, I knew that I wanted to see the world. So during this year at the Athens Olympics, I told my editors, hey, like I really want to go and travel. So I took a year out. I saved and saved and saved. And I had the assignment, a 6-week assignment of the Athens Olympics, and then I went traveling after that. And I ended up in Spain, in the US, in Asia, in Mexico. I studied Spanish there for 3 months back in 2004, and I think this is why I've settled down here in Mexico, because I just had an affinity for it and for the people. But it was during that time that I was offered a staff job to shoot news in London for Getty. So go on.
I'm sorry, Daniel, sorry to interrupt you again, but we got a question from one of our viewers, Mr. Rezwan Siddiqui. He asked, sports photography captures human emotions during winning and losing. Is it one of the reasons?
Is what one of the reasons? I mean, sorry, is what one of the reasons? Just to clarify.
All right, yeah. So, I think you already answered this question, because he asked like sports photography captures human emotions and during winning and losing. So, yeah, I think you already.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of you're very, very in tune with all moments of emotion. So you kind of you learn, when you're on a tennis court and there's 200 other photographers right next to you, you're looking and studying that person and watching for any kind of emotion that will then tell a larger story. And I suppose that I think that also helped me sort of like hone my skills in a way, how to kind of focus in the moment on people's emotions in order to capture those, in order to better tell stories. And also, it connects people, it connects the viewer to what you're seeing,
Yeah, definitely. So you were continuing. So how did you make the transition from the sports photography to the social documentary photographer or a photojournalist? Like when was the time? What made?
I think around 2003. I mean, I had photographed. 2004. I had photographed, I think 3 or 4 Australian Opens at that point. And look, don't get me wrong, I love sport. It is incredible. But after doing 3 or 4 seasons, it became kind of repetitive, and I wanted to see a deeper meaning of things that were going on in the world, and that's what kind of led me to take a year out in order to kind of pursue, go out and travel and see the world. And it was during that year as well. And I think when you're young, when you're incredibly energetic, and, my editors definitely knew that I wanted to be making a transition. And also towards the end, before I left Australia in 2004, I'd been shooting entertainment assignments, news assignments. I was chasing bushfires. I was doing, red carpet photos, a royal Prince Harry's visit to Australia in 2003. I was shooting everything because I was like curious and I wanted to improve. So they kind of knew that I wanted to travel, and I think at their meetings, the Australian boss sort of said, "Hey, we've got this young kid who's shooting, and he wants to kind of do more." And in London, they were looking for a new news photographer at the time. Another photographer was leaving, so it kind of paired up kind of perfectly. We talked at the Athens Olympics about that, and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in working in London as a news photographer?" At that point, all you say is yes, and especially when you're a freelancer, yep. The only thing in your vocabulary is yes. So I was excited, and I'd started sort of traveling, through my volleyball as well, and I just wanted to see more. I wanted to experience more. And I got the opportunity in London, based there, to go. One of my first international assignments was to go to Niger and cover the food crisis there. And I remember my editor in London, Hugh Pinney, was saying, "Okay, he was giving me a shot list of, okay, these are the things that you should focus on," which was great. And I remember Pancho Bernasconi's editor from, he's now the international editor at Getty. One of the most amazing, incredible, empowering things I remember him saying was, "Daniel, just go there and see what is happening on the ground and shoot what's happening in front of you." And that kind of that made me feel a lot more calm and comfortable. And it kind of empowered me to go out there. And this was one of my first images that was front page of the Washington Post. But it still took a number of years, as a photojournalist, to kind of come into my own, also to feel that I belonged there and I wasn't like a fake, the sense of legitimacy, I feel, took a number of years, because when I first got there, I just had no idea why, how people knew what to photograph and what events to go out. I was turning up late for assignments. It was a very, you can only ever do that once. And I did that, I think, on my first day, and I kind of missed the event, and I kind of made up for it later on. But that kind of panic, and when you're working in London, you're working with a lot of photographers, yep, next to you, and it's extremely competitive.
It is.
So what I was doing, while I was working in London and learning from other photographers there, I was pitching stories outside of the UK. This is a story that was very sort of close to my upbringing. This is a story on Chernobyl that I photographed in 2006, ahead of the 20th anniversary of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster. So, as a kid, our parents, were in the streets protesting because the Soviet government wasn't giving out information exactly what had happened. So I grew up knowing that there was more to a story. So, being Ukrainian as well and speaking Ukrainian, growing up in my household, I pitched this story to my editor to go out, and I photographed, half of this on digital, half of this on film, and I went to the exclusion zone. In the top right, you have the reactor, and on the left, you have the town of Pripyat that was left. And during that time, you're trying to, I'm shooting digital, I'm shooting film. And I went and spent time with the villagers there, interviewing them, and finding out why they were still living in, a nuclear, a toxic kind of area around there.
Yes.
many people had connections with the country and where they grew up, and they were like, look, I was born here and I'm gonna die here. So I started kind of getting out and photographing more. I was sent to Iraq to cover the trial of Saddam Hussein. This was extremely surreal. This photograph was taken from a remote camera. And there's an interesting story behind this photo, because this is one of the reasons why now I'm working, I feel, for the New York Times. When I was in the West Bank a year or two later, I met a photographer there who had set up the cameras, David First, who was working for AFP, who'd set up the cameras in the Saddam courtroom. And this is before you had, drones or anything like that. So this is a remote camera. Every angle that you see of Saddam, from the top or the top front or top angle, are set up by cameras that this photographer David First set up. So and there was a agency pool of photographers that were covering the trial. And I remember meeting him a year or two afterwards and saying, "Oh, hey, I covered the trial, and I used your setup of cameras that existed in there." So we ended up staying friends, and at one point he became the editor of the New York Times International. So one of the things that throughout your career that we have to think about, consciously or unconsciously, is that the careers are long. So how you relate to people, how you get on to people at the start of your career may affect your career sort of later on. We became photographer friends, and then later he became an editor. He became my editor and is my editor now at the New York Times, where I contribute to them working freelance. But building networks is extremely important. Also having a camaraderie with photographers. I know a lot of times, people are really competitive, and in some places, people have gone and sabotaged other photographers. And photography is a long career. So however you treat someone when you're starting out or in your middle of your career, people have long memories. So it's important to foster those relationships and keep those relationships as well. But it's kind of, how we work with everyone, how I like to work in the field as well. Maintaining relationships is incredibly important.
Yeah, it's a very important point you have just raised, because I think the point you are most emphasizing on, rather than only being a photographer, you have to be a good human being too, and you have to treat the people as same as the way you want to be treated by them. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's very important. And whenever especially a photographer like you, roaming around all over the world, and you never know which situation you end up in. So so you might need help from different people, and maybe you never thought or imagined of.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's very important too. So before I go to the Benazir Bhutto, so Benazir Bhutto remarks a very significant importance in the history of the subcontinent, as well as it's a very important for Bangladesh too. So we know that what I believe that you were in the event of the tragic assassination of Benazir Bhutto too, right?
I was not at the assassination. This was, I believe, in August, September of 2007, and this is my first trip to Pakistan. So for me, I have, and having lived in India for 7 years, from 2000.
Is this
2009.
after living in India for 7 years, or
No, this isn't from 2007. This is
yeah.
her homecoming parade in 2007, her coming back, and allegedly there are reports of over 100,000 people in the streets welcoming her. And it was my first kind of real international news assignment, where there were, seasoned international photographers there, John Moore, David Gutenfelder, and, a lot of photographers who were flown in for this specific kind of event. Benazir Bhutto returning back to Pakistan from self-exile. Very, very important sort of historically. So this photograph was taken on a bus, on her campaign kind of bus, and going through the streets. And I was on the plane with her as she landed from Dubai to Karachi. And I remember being packed in, and there were a number of news photographers there from many different outlets. And I remember getting off the plane, photographing her coming off the plane, and then I went to file with my sat phone, with my backpack, and kind of like being greeted with this kind of crowd in the streets. I got separated from the photographers that I was traveling with, and when I saw the campaign bus, so I started, I filed the first sort of photos, and my experience in London, helped, me be able to file photographs, quickly from a scene. So photographed her coming off the plane, touching Pakistani soil, and I remember filing and then going, oh no, I have to catch up with the procession, and I need to get some kind of photographs. I knew that Paula Bronstein, John Moore from Getty were there, but having traveled, so I actually thought that there were photographers on the bus with her. And I remember kind of scrambling through the crowd and getting to the back of the bus and saying, hey, I'm holding up my press pass. Hey, can I get on? And I was like, just kept on being pushed back and pushed back and pushed back through this sea of people. And I don't know how I talked my way onto the bus, but I was like, I have to be, on. I just need to get a portrait of Benazir. And it was probably 30, 40 minutes of really kind of like being pushed and thrown aside through this kind of a crowd, because the whole bus is surrounded by people, and I knew that I had to get onto the bus. And when I got onto the bus, after pushing and seeing other photographers trying to get onto the bus, and the security was really, really tight, they were pushed aside, but somehow I managed to agree to the security guy, talk him into it, and I managed to squeeze on. But this is kind of one of those defining moments, I feel, in my career where, you're faced with a situation where people are telling you no, 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 no. And once I got onto the bus, I was expecting to see like a whole bunch of other photographers there. And then when I got up there, I realized that I was the only photographer that, apart from, her entourage, that had been up there, and I was able to kind of make this frame of her greeting the crowd. And for me, it kind of represents the, how sometimes hard you have to kind of battle to make a frame, and how you have to be persistent and keep on working. So this day ended up being a very bittersweet day, because after getting these photographs and shooting more and getting to the crowd, the procession continued, and the plan was to meet up with it later in the afternoon. So I went back to the hotel. I started walking along the streets, and a young Pakistani boy was on a motorbike and offered me a lift back, which was amazing. And kind of this being my first trip to Pakistan, I found people to be extremely welcoming and warm. And it would sort of like, shape my experience in the region. And I remember getting back to the hotel, filing the photographs, thinking that, maybe today was over and tomorrow there'd be more to cover. And then there was news of a suicide bomber, or a bombing that had later would find out, killed 142 people in the homecoming parade that we were in a few hours earlier. And, from one experience to another experience, I hadn't witnessed, the aftermath of a bombing. And this was another moment for me in my career that was extremely difficult. And I knew that, that these photographs were important. It was important to show the situation of what this looks like, on the ground. And I remember going to the hospital and shooting there. And I remember one point there was a young boy on a bed, and he'd lost his leg, and his hand was reaching out to another man just across the stretcher. And he just needed that kind of like that human connection and touch. And I remember just breaking down and crying during that time, and surrounded by stretchers and people screaming on the floor, waiting to be seen by a doctor, medical team scrambling to do everything that they could. And I just remember being overcome by emotion. And, after, I couldn't shoot. For that period of time. And I remember telling myself and try to snap me out of it, instead of saying, look, I'm not a medic. I'm not a doctor. The only way that I can, can do anything here is by documenting. And that's what kind of like, clicked me out of the situation and sort of like made me sort of focus more onto what was happening. And this is something that, like I always, am battling with when you're somewhere that is this terrible or this awful, and that we have a role in this, and our role as journalists, as photojournalists, is to document what is going on. And if we're not documenting, if we're not there, then I shouldn't be there. I'm not a medic. I can't help these guys.
Yeah, I can relate a little bit, because as a photojournalist, we have gone through similar types of situation. I know that you have been in numerous tragic occasions in your life, tragic situations, and you have seen a lot of deaths in front of you. Is there any situation you can remember where you wanted to do something, but it was not in your ability, or it was not in your you were not able to do anything, but you really wanted to do
something? I mean, absolutely. I mean, there were times in Liberia when I was covering the Ebola outbreak in 2014, and we had come across, and I'll talk about this later once I get to the Ebola work. But yeah, there were times when that we would be on the phone calling an ambulance because there is someone like literally dying in front of us. And we can't, being highly infectious, we can't touch them. I can't do anything else, but all I could do is, I mean, rather than sort of photographing, we made sure that we were able to, get medical attention for someone who needed medical attention. And yeah, I think always you're wrestling with, a lot of times you're on the scene, when we're on the scene, there are medics there. There are people there happening, because a lot of times we, in order to get to these situations and places, you're working with medical teams. So I'll tell you later about working with various organizations in covering Ebola, but it's important to kind of partner up. So a lot of times there are people there that are helping, but then there are a number of other times when there is no one else, and I don't know, for me, my obligation as a human being is try to help people first, and if possible document what's happening, but if it's a life-death situation, I would like to think that I would absolutely help first.
I understand that. Yeah. So then, what did you do? Did you go back to Australia and then you come back to India and then?
Yeah, no. So during this time, from 2005 into 2009, I was based in this is another story in Pakistan I'll get to. I was based in London, and I'd made an agreement with my editor Hugh that, hey, I'll work 3 years in London, but my whole idea is that I'd like to be based out in the field, out in an office somewhere, covering international assignments and news. So John Moore was actually on the scene of the bombing of Benazir Bhutto at the end of 2007, and he was based in Pakistan at the time.
And as well as Gutenfiddle as well, right?
That's right. And
I've seen the pictures.
Yeah,
very compelling pictures, very harrowing.
Absolutely, and John was one of the very few photographers that was on the scene. Has images of the actual, blast, and the aftermath. So when you come to experience something, that sort of life-threatening, he kind of reassessed his situation in Pakistan, and at that time for him the best thing was to move out, which then created an opportunity for me to move to that region. So my editors in London, knowing that I had a sport background and that there was a lot of cricket in India, sent me over there, and so in 2009 I started being based in Delhi, and that for me was challenging at first, because you don't know what to cover. You finally have a region, so it kind of took a while. I think it took about a year of doing assignments that the office expected you to do or wanted you to do or fulfill a role. I was doing a lot of sport. I think I was doing press conferences, and then doing small stories. And it was kind of around that time when I was really 2009, 2010, when I was like drawn to what was happening in Pakistan. And there was the government was there was a campaign against the Taliban, which is part of this photo story here. And I spent a lot of months in displacement camps, covering the situations there of people who were fleeing the fighting between the Pakistan army and the Taliban. So on the top right here, you have in one of the villages near Buner in northern Pakistan, that was like a Taliban stronghold, and the Pakistani army had come and bombed because the Taliban had created all tunnels throughout the whole town. So the only thing they could do to really kind of like get them out was to completely bomb. So I'd spent time trying to get embeds with the military there, and unsuccessfully. I was working with another Reuters photographer and other photographers as well, and we were going in to tell the story of the people who were affected by this war. And that's what kind of like, drew me in to Pakistan. And then the year after that is when the Pakistan floods hit. And it was, I think, the start of the rainy season, and there was massive flooding. And it took me, Reuters colleague friend reached out and would say, hey, this is going to be, this flooding is unprecedented. It's really, really bad. So I flew that day.
Was it Adris Latif?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we started covering the story together, sharing resources, because, as you well know, that it is safer a lot of the times to cover these stories with other people for safety in numbers in the field, and also sharing resources, keeping costs down, but also kind of working on that network. You can get a lot more done working as a team than you can kind of individually. And it was at that time that I wasn't working with journalists, that I was, you're there as a photo reporter, so to speak. And this would be one of the defining kind of moments in my career as a photojournalist as well, which I'll continue. But this was a story that over like 6 to 8 weeks that followed from the top of the country, from the mountainous areas down through Punjab and through Sindh province, and spending sort of 6 to 8 weeks, going through floodwaters, spending hours and hours at military bases, waiting for access to helicopters. And we had to really convince them that our role as journalists, as photographers, was important in documenting the situation on the ground. So it was, Idris and I were given one opportunity to get on the helicopter one day. One of Idris's photographs the next day made it to the front page of a paper in Dubai, and the headline read, "Pakistan needs aid." So he was able to take that photograph to the head of the base there, where a lot of the relief flights were going, because you'll see in some of these images it looks more like an ocean than flooding. So we were able to show that image to the general commander there, and he gave us full access. He finally, he understood that, okay, images of the severity of the crisis actually meant that people got to know what was happening, and then there was an opportunity for aid or for the international community to be able to help. So this was, an assignment that we kind of, 6 to 8 weeks, going out every single day, muddy clothes, satellite phone, driving to the edge of floodwaters, then going into floodwaters, also going in with spending time with the helicopters and getting to these remote images. So this photograph here was taken 6 weeks after the start of the floods. And this is a village near Tata in South Pakistan. And we had hovered around this village, which now looked like an island, just completely surrounded by water. And you can see in the bottom left corner, this is where it's a roof of maybe a stable or something like that. So we're dropping rice and food, cooked rice on the top. And these are the villagers scrambling through floodwaters 6 weeks after the start. This shows like the desperation. So this made the front page of the New York Times like 6 weeks later, And this comes, the first 2 weeks there was a lot of coverage of the flooding, and a lot of times with news stories there is a fatigue. There is a fatigue that happens. All the papers run stories, and they're like, okay, it's done. And for me, the importance of this photograph is that even after it's off the front pages, these people are still there. They're still experiencing what the situation that they're in. A lot of times we get to leave, or there's another focus or another headline. So this, what for me was an indicator that it's like it is important to stay behind and to tell long-term stories of what hardships people are enduring, and just how brave they are, the challenges that they face, and so
yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to interrupt because I have read in one of your Instagram posts that you shared the photos of the Pakistan floods, and you very humbly shared the story that you made the photos, and you mentioned that you were embarrassed for not knowing the people in the pictures.
Absolutely.
And you were, I think you were the very few journalists I've seen who could admit it, right? And I must say that it was very modest of you. So, please share it. Like I know that you went back to Pakistan again, and then you identified the people you have photographed, and then you collected the names and the story.
Yeah. So the thing for me was that this story was one of the first stories that I had that was widely recognized. This image here was in Time Magazine's top 10 images of the year. It was recognized in World Press Photo, won first prize in stories. I was a finalist with Paula Bronstein for the Pulitzer for our work for the Pakistan floods. And there were a number of accolades, and it was David Burnett and Kira Pollock from Time Magazine when I was at the ceremony in Amsterdam, and at this point you feel like that you've done the story justice, and that your photographs have made a difference. And I remember Kira and David going, well, who are the people in this photograph? And I'd captioned the photograph, a man and a boy, walk through flood waters. There's a truck in the background illuminating them from behind. And for this image that was widely published and widely seen, I had this overwhelming sense of guilt came across me, which was like, what, I actually don't know the story, and therefore if they don't know the story, then I'm reducing these people just to our own narrative, my own vision of what was happening. And I felt so guilty, and I remember, I can't remember whether it was David or Kira, but they said, like, why don't you go back and find them? And during this whole time, while I'm working in Pakistan, I was making notes, and also I was doing. It was the time Google Maps was just working on phones, so I was able to make pins. So when I was with the Pakistan Army and we were flying from one area to the other, we'd take off from the base, but then we would land in an area. So when we were taking off and leaving from there, I would always drop a pin, so I knew the location. So I actually knew where I photographed, and this is before geotagging and phones, cameras having that function, but I was able to track down the exact village. So I pitched to my editor Hugh that I wanted to go back and kind of do a before and after series, but also see if I could go back and find the background, some of the stories behind the people, to do more in-depth reporting. So I kind of, printed up all of these photographs that you can see here. On the back of the photographs, I also had the exact date of the photo, the time that it was shot, the time of day, 6:07 p.m., 31 seconds. It was shot, on a 35 mil lens, ISO 200, etc. So I was able to go back and with a team there of Asim, a local journalist from the area who I had met in Pakistan through our travels, and with Nazim, our driver, we went driving. We were driving through villages and showing these photographs and saying, "Hey, do you know who these people are?" So we were lucky that we started off in a village, but when they're walking through the floodwaters, I don't know whether they live in that village, they live in the village behind, or maybe 100 kilometers or 50 kilometers ahead. So we had no idea. All we knew was the kind of the starting point. So we spent a day or two showing the photographs around, and then one day, one morning, we stopped off at all the tea stalls because that's where most people sort of congregated. And then one person was like, "Why don't you try the chicken shop?" Because everyone goes to the chicken shop, and the guy there. So they then indicated, a guy looked at the photo, was like, "Yeah, that's my neighbor." So what I was able to do was like finally do the interview that I wanted to do. I feel that was kind of more for myself, but what it changed for me was, and then I found out that a year later, Muin Ibrahim, who's 10 in the background, and it was his grandfather, Ghulam Kadir, who were the ones that were walking through floodwaters, and they had been displaced, and that night they were walking back to find out what fate had bestowed upon their farm, and they found out that most of the cattle had died, and the house was destroyed, and their neighbor had drowned. But it was just this, just the process of going back to try to make amends, that then this was like a fundamental shift for me in my approach to photojournalism, and that the importance of that it was necessary to know the backstory, to know what was happening within the images, to be able to better tell the story, better tell the story, narrate the story, and let people know what was happening. So it was kind of during this time where working as a news photographer for an agency, I wanted to work more on long-term projects. And it was at this point in 2013, a year or two, the year afterwards, I went to Japan and did an immersive story there on people affected by the tsunami, but a year later, to show what was going on. And it was kind of after that I'm getting still pulled to do cricket. You get sent to a story, you have a limited amount of time. And I knew what I wanted to do was more long-form reporting. So it was a difficult decision to leave a staff job. But David, remembering the story from the Saddam trial, had become the photo editor of the New York Times. So we were having conversations. He actually called me on my mobile phone during the Pakistan floods, when he, put one of the images on the front page, and it was like, "Hey, you're doing a great job. Work hard. Keep it up. This is a really, really important story." And just kind of having that support in the background, was increasingly inspirational and motivational. And so I decided to go freelance, and David gave me an opportunity. He said, "Look, I can't guarantee anything. What I can give you is 2-3 months working out of the office in Afghanistan." And this is one of the first stories here that I did on malnutrition in Afghanistan with the journalist Rodney Nordland. And it kind of really sort of, then I started working with journalists, seeing their how they interviewed people and how they kind of found their stories, and also how they stuck with stories as well and followed them through. So I kept on learning and kind of honing. I found out at that point that the next step for me was to become a better journalist. Like the images in the floods showed that I was able to cover a story, but there was one bit for me that was kind of lacking, and that kind of like connection to the people and following up. And that was, I suppose the kick in the butt that I needed to evolve my journalism and to realize that that it is important to know the story inside and out, and interview as many people as possible in order to best to be able to tell the story and connect, get people to connect to that story as well. Because that context, I feel, is everything with powerful imagery. You can have an image, you can have a standalone image, but if you can have context, and if that tells that one image that you have, that one microsecond tells a much larger story, then that is powerful. It's powerful, successful storytelling.
Definitely, yeah. Your pictures just don't tell stories. It tells stories in like thousands of different layers, and your pictures also give a sense of the place and the people and the culture as well. And it's not only whenever you are taking photos, the photos might be of the people, of the victims, or a lot of difficult situations, but your pictures shows the beauty, such like in this particular picture. You see, it's we can understand that this is in Afghanistan, but is the rose and the composition in the mountains and behind it, it all created a very, very beautiful image. So we got an interesting question from one of our viewers that say, Mr. Rizwan Siddiqui. He said, traveling around the world while doing what you love most is anyone's dream job. Definitely. So, but it sounds like it is often accompanied by perils. Any story you can share where you felt you got into some unwanted situation, or even lucky to come out alive?
Yes, a number of situations.
I know that. Yeah.
Actually, just before this photograph was taken, this was an embed. The previous photograph you saw was a story that I did with Azam Ahmed, who now a close friend, and we work closely together. He's now the bureau chief here in Mexico City as well. This is an embed that we did with the Afghan military, and on the first day it was a resupply mission through Taliban territory. So they had to go through, and there was this remote base that was surrounded by Taliban, and we had to spend 3-4 days with backpacks kind of walking through IED infested villages and going along the road. So on the first day, we encountered 13 or 14 improvised explosive devices that were set up as booby traps along the way. So we were walking with the Afghan soldiers and the Afghan army. So just before this photograph was taken, the reason why this is happening is we were in an ambush walking through an apple orchard. So you have Taliban who were kind of in the hills around this position here and are now retreating. And this is a photograph of the commander who was a commander fighting with the Mujahideen against the Russians years before. And this was one of the techniques that they used. They were using a missile, and they were putting it on a mound of dirt, just like a football player does when they're putting the ball down and they're lining up their shot. They would line it up, and then with the car battery, they would ignite the missile. So it was actually before this missile actually missed the village, missed the point, and actually went over the mountain and completely missed. So it's not a very accurate missile guidance system. But this is one of the situations in 2005 in Iraq. I was with an embed with British military, and the convoy that I was in, the vehicle that I was in was actually hit by a roadside bomb. And this was before, months before these roadside bombs were then, popping holes through armored vehicles. And I was extremely lucky that it pierced like 5 of 6 of the protective layers. But if it was, the technology from 3 months later, then it would have been a very, very different story. But there's a lot of kind of risks and challenges. Sometimes the risks are obvious, and a lot of times, the most scary are the ones that aren't. Covering Ebola had its certain challenges. Now covering COVID-19 as well also has its challenges. But they're probably the two most recent ones that I can think of.
All right. Yeah. So we got a comment from Mahmoud Hussein Upu. He said, Daniel Berehulak, is it possible to share a few memories from your story, Philippines Drug War? So I think a lot of our viewers are eagerly waiting to know the stories of your Philippines, from the Philippines.
Okay.
So if you wanna,
absolutely.
I can go hours after hours. On your pictures, these are so important and so powerful pictures. So
I'll just move through some of these quickly. What I might do is lead into Ebola, if that's all right, and then we can kind of finish with the the Philippines. But throughout this time from 2013, I'm working with journalists, getting sort of more in tune with stories. This is an environmental story on Mennonites that are moving out of northern Mexico because of lack of water. So covering Ebola was, this isn't, I think what we're experiencing now with COVID is something that that people in our lifetime don't have that much sort of experience with covering sort of, massive epidemics, pandemics. So this is myself in a suit, probably like a week or two in, and just to kind of note that I probably only wore the suit maybe half a dozen times during my stay in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and also in Guinea, because of the fact that, very kind of similar to now, it's people that, if there's limited sort of education or a limited message, or you're getting an incorrect message like the one that you're getting in the US now, that that COVID-19 isn't real or whatever. So during that time, the biggest thing was people didn't believe that that was actually real. That was a challenge. So if I were to turn up in my suit in a small village, in Guinea, there were medical workers that had been attacked and killed. So, for safety, you have to, I was going in with medical teams. I was working with journalists. but you had to be very, very careful about where you're going, and also going with people from the area as well. And one of the first things that I did, David called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to cover Ebola?" And I'd been following it in the news, and I knew that it was a story of global importance, and I immediately said yes. I'm not thinking, and then afterwards I was like, "Damn, how do I do this, and how do I do this quickly, safely?" Sorry. So I called John Moore, close friend and colleague, who had been out there, and John had reassured me that, look, yes, it is dangerous, but there is a safe way to cover the story, and I'll just back up. So the first thing that I flew to Liberia. One of the first places that John took me was to the MSF clinic there, where I kind of went through an impromptu sort of training, and I watched how medical workers for quite some time were being dressed, and also them coming out and being sprayed and disinfected, and how they were undressed as well. So, a lot of times you get, there's not that much information out there, and the only way that that you find out is in the field and learning as much as you can by speaking to as many people there as possible. So worked with a number of different journalists, Nori Anishi being one of them. At first it was covering what was happening in front of us. This was a man that had been dragged out of his house. He'd passed away, and they'd been calling the ambulance, they'd been calling everyone, and with the breakdown of the medical system in Liberia, all of the care facilities were completely overflooded. So there weren't people who were able to come out for every single emergency. So the only way that people can kind of find a solution was to drag the body into the street, to block traffic, and then that would force the ambulance to come. So there were a lot of, we were driving around, we were embedding with burial units. It was difficult to get sort of access to the actual clinics to photograph, treatment or anything like that. And it was only later that we were able to gain access to one of those. But I spent the first kind of, couple of weeks trying to build networks to get to know people, and spending time with, as I mentioned, with burial teams. And it's once you're going out with people, you start seeing more and getting a sense of what was happening. So we've done a number of short stories, and it was we were looking at a way to tell the story differently, and to really sort of impact on how it was affecting the community. And this is this photograph here was kind of the start of we wanted to tell a story of a family that had been sort of affected by Ebola. So this is Esther, who's 5 years old. Similarly with the man that was on the street, she was showing symptoms, and her family put her in the street because they'd also called the ambulances, but she was lying on the floor in the street. And they were desperate for medical attention. So we ended up following this family and this story for the next, I think, 6 weeks or so. So we kind of followed from one family member passing it on to the other, the rifts between the uncles and the aunts who brought the virus into, and it just showed the complexities. A lot of times, very similar to what we're experiencing now. If what if one of your family members has come down, and you've got a massive family and they bring it in, people people blame other people, for bringing it in. So after covering the story I ended up covering the story for over 103 days in the three countries there, and we were embedded in a international medical corps clinic out in the jungle, and we were able to kind of follow the daily routine of the medical workers and all of the cases there. What I wanted to do was kind of tell a different story after that. So what I was speaking with David as well, we kind of worked out, how can we tell the story of like the bravery of people, what people have been experiencing. So this kind of led to a portrait series that we did for the New York Times. This is one of the treatment centers. This was a building that they were building, so I kind of hijacked it while they were still building it, and set up a small little studio with that's the biggest bed sheet that you can find in Liberia that were being used for hotels. And then I got construction lights that construction workers used to light up roads at night to light the studio. So I spent time interviewing each one of the medical workers and also the survivors in this one facility to kind of give more of an in-depth background of what they were experiencing during the epidemic, and also why they were doing it as well. And just the different roles that people had, the nurses, the disinfection teams, the sprayers. This is Junior Samuel, who is one of the survivors who came out. Paris Momanye, she had, with all of the mask and everything on, similarly how people are being treated now with COVID-19, all she wanted to do was to see the people, see her eyes, and to be able to, embrace them, but she couldn't. So she would, wearing a whole full PPE, she would console them and rub their backs and hold their hands. And this is one of the, so this is something like, working in the field, I'm always thinking of different ways to advance the story, and, how can we better tell by photographs and also by the words as well. So New York Times did a whole pull-out series in a small little section, and then also on online, there's a massive online gallery as well. You can actually read the personal stories behind each one of the professionals who were risking so much. And this series was called Braving Ebola.
So these are like very incredible images. These have been everywhere. They have been published numerously, and in different platforms in the international media. But I was just wondering, you have met a lot of families, right?
Yeah.
Not only during the Ebola, but in all of your assignments in Philippines, Iraq, Iran, in Afghanistan, Nepal, and everywhere in the world. So. How do you whenever you are facing these kind of tragic moments of the families, and as well as you are also in the situation in high risk, and you have it in mind that you have to go back to your own family. So how do you deal with all this dilemma?
Yeah, look, what has kind of driven me for so many years is having the sort of the understanding and context that, look, I get to leave, and it is the families that are, enduring so much. I still like to keep in touch with people that I've photographed over the years through Facebook and various messengers. And those connections are important as well, and you want to know that you've done the stories justice and you've done the people justice in the stories as well, to tell their side of things, because a lot of times these are people who don't have a voice, and don't have the opportunity to share their experiences with anyone. So what motivated me was absolutely that, was telling people stories, and I think what we were talking about yesterday, which I think you're alluding to, is that a lot of times we get to leave, and for me, I feel very, very fortunate that I get to go back to a safe place and a home, surrounded by people I love. But one thing is that, I've always been conscious of that, these people's lives continue. And that's why it's important, to do the story justice, keeping in touch with people as well. But it took me, I think, after the Philippines to really realize that all of this does have an effect on us as well. And I naively thought for so many years that maybe I was becoming desensitized. That was obviously not the case, because every situation was different. But there's always, something that that sticks to you, that follows through. So certainly in the last few years that I've kind of noticed that, and I've taken a little bit of time off work to heal myself emotionally, because all of these experiences, they do have an effect, and they have an effect on me, and they have effect on the people around me as well, because
I understand that. A lot of time people think that this we are means living in our dream job, but there are a lot of consequences photojournalists have to go through. And we have received a similar type of question from one of the journalists from Bangladesh, Dila Jahan. She asked, have you ever experienced post-traumatic situation after the assignment? If yes, how did you manage that?
Yeah, look, I think I've ignored a lot of post-traumatic stress that has been accumulating over the years, and I kept on, I'd keep on ignoring it. I would go visit friends, close, dear friends around the world who I could open up to and talk to, and I would certainly do that. And then I thought that was like a form of therapy. But it's not enough. And I feel like that over the years, the post-traumatic stress has been kind of increasing. Specifically after the Philippines, I was having extremely violent nightmares. Night after night, I would wake up completely exhausted. Dreams of myself. Surrounded by extreme sort of acts of violence, and it kind of took a long time to, and I'm still working on it as well. But being surrounded by family, I think getting psychological help is important as well, and I think it's something that we need to be more open about in our community. And acknowledge that yes, there is an effect, and that it is okay for us to talk about it and to get help. And I think that's one of the things that that would certainly help people recovering. From covering sort of certain situations, is sort of acknowledgement. But for so many years, I didn't acknowledge it. But it was coming up, I was becoming short-tempered. My dreams were off. I wasn't being the kindest to the people that I loved. So it's kind of it's with me. It was absolutely cumulative, and it's taken a number of years to get myself to a better place. But what I've always tried to focus on is, that I feel what people have experienced is far more important. And it is, I've also realized now, it is also important to acknowledge the effect that all of these stories absolutely have on us as well. And we should look at ways that we could get help.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it is the story which does matter, right? So, Daniel, if I were, I think that as I was telling you that I can spend hours after hours, and my viewers will never be tired. But if we can go to the Philippine story very
absolutely,
quickly,
we're right here.
Yeah. So I think that is one of the most significant work you have done in the Philippines in your career, documenting the so-called drug war by the President Rodrigo Duterte. So homicide and the extrajudicial killings, right?
Yes.
So I know that you had pitched the story by yourself to the editor, and while covering the assignment, you have passed nights in the police stations, following local journalists and the families. Like, okay, so like, tell us, how did you get into the idea, and what was the reason behind being interested to cover the story amid a very high risk situation?
Yeah, so this was the story, and I mean, as like on my days off, I still follow news around the world and international news. And I remember there being a presidential candidate, Rodrigo Duterte, who was reported to, saying quite drastic things, saying that he wanted to cure Philippines' drug problem by killing people in the street. So he also said a number of alarming things, and it made sort of headlines. So I like to keep abreast of news of things that are going around the world. So when after he came into power, literally days afterwards, I started seeing images of people being killed in the streets, and I kind of, I noted that. I kept on following the story, and over the sort of the month and a half, I just saw that this was sort of like, this was a new norm in the Philippines. And what shocked me was, I know that there were a number of Filipino journalists that were covering the story, but what I was amazed by, that more people didn't know about what was happening, and I was expecting more of sort of an international sort of outcry, but I was kind of more just amazed that, how could this be happening, and I wanted to go and investigate and find out more about the situation, so I pitched the story, and it was at a time leading up to the US elections, and David mentioned that there might not be a journalist who can cover out, because this is just before Trump now was elected. And so I kind of went out there, and after a week, knowing that I had possibly had to, even write the story as well. So I, reached out to a number of friends, a friend VJ who I'd met in Delhi, a Filipino photographer, and I was like, hey, what's the situation like? Is it still going on? What do you know about it? And he was like, yes, it's still going on, and I think I have a feeling that it's only going to get worse. So I was very, very fortunate. So with everyone, as working in South Asia, everyone kind of helps. A lot of people help each other out in terms of translators, fixers, drivers, the network, and helping people out. And I just want to kind of mention this as well. Like, all of this work that I've done has been with with the help of someone. This isn't just me. There are translators. There are editors, there are so many people, there are drivers that are involved in doing what we do. So I was very, very lucky to be partnered up with Rita Concepcion, who's an amazing TV journalist and producer, and I landed in the Philippines early morning, and we met up that morning and went out that evening. So one thing that I realized was with this story was that the first crime scene that we got to were on the train tracks, on these train tracks. And there were maybe, 30, 40, 50, probably 30 journalists from various different types of media that were there. And I remember being there, and there were 3 bodies on the train tracks. This is not the scene. I'm just kind of giving you the background of how I started covering. And all of a sudden, there was a police cordon up, people were photographing, and then all of a sudden, everybody disappeared. Like that. People started running to their cars. And I looked to Rika, and she said, "Oh, it's news of another crime scene." And I remember looking at her and saying, "Well, how do we find out what happened here if we're then chasing another crime scene?" So what I knew, what was apparent, and through my experience in Pakistan and everywhere, was that we had to do extremely solid and diligent reporting to find out what was happening at that scene. So I knew that rather than chasing every scene, we had to be more thorough and diligent and work slower by interviewing more people. We were getting obviously the police accounts, and all the police accounts were pretty much copy paste. Oh, the person resisted arrest. They had a gun. They went for the gun, and the police retaliated in self-defense, and the people were shot. And after a number of days of this, and seeing the crime scenes as well, it looked like these were being staged. That it wasn't the truth that was coming out. So the only way that we're going to find out the truth is by staying behind, staying longer, following up with families, spending time with families, and interviewing eyewitnesses and getting the contradicting accounts and matching them up. Okay, so I was there for 35 nights, and we probably were out every single night and every single day. So I was getting sleep. I was going back to the hotel, around 5 a.m., sometimes having, and I was working with a lot of local reporters there, radio reporters, TV, other photographers as well, because once again, you have safety in numbers, and also you get more information as well. So we'd wait at the police stations, waited news of crime scenes, and then we would go and chase them. And with the crazy traffic in Manila during the day, it was very difficult to move. And look, most of these crime scenes were at night as well, but we were zigzagging across the city trying to get there before the police arrived, to photograph the situations or what were happening. We were then following up with families, interviewing them. We were then going to funerals, documenting the effects that the drug war was happening. This image here was one of the morgues that had been overflowed. A lot of the people that were being targeted were in the poorest of areas. So there was one family that the mother actually lost two of the boys, and she didn't have the means to actually pay for the burial. So we accompanied them on this day, as she went there to try to negotiate with the guy at the funeral parlor. Please, can you give me a discount on, I want to have my sons buried in, dignified manner. So what I learned was that, there were so many, and I think we got to around 42 of the crime scenes. But we had to, when we're telling the story, you have to focus on one story or another story that story of a family that is going to tell a bigger picture, a story of everything that was happening. Also with this story as well, leading up to the US elections, I didn't know whether I was going to get pulled out after the first week. It was a 35-day assignment, but I didn't know that from the start. So every day I'm kind of expecting that I'm going to get pulled out. So every day I'm working as if it's my last day. So, getting out early, staying out all night, and, trying to gather as much information as possible. There were times where I would go back to the hotel and you'd try to get some sleep, knowing that, hey, if I'm there, I have a limited amount of time to tell this story. There's stuff that's going on right now, and if we're not out, we're not covering it. So a lot of times you have to be covering it like, you're covering it as if it is the last your last day there. So you're just trying to do as much as possible.
Yeah. I think these are the challenges as an independent photojournalist. And you also mentioned it very rightly. I think that historically we have seen that in this kind of situation, especially in the countries where democratic systems is fragile, especially where the president like Rodrigo Duterte, the state has their own narrative to portray and
Absolutely.
justify the extrajudicial killings. It's very similar things happening in India and Bangladesh too. So,
that's right.
And the state often uses police or military forces to execute their agendas, right? So, you already explained it, but if you could emphasize a little bit more about that, as you have been embedding with the police, you had carried out the raids and homicides. You have been following them all the time. Did you ever feel intimidated, or how did you manage?
We didn't. What was interesting was that before I arrived in the first few months, I arrived in late August, September, and before I arrived, the police were happily telling the journalists, hey, this is where there's a crime scene, etc. After a while, the police realized, because what the police were doing, where they were saying, oh, this was a legitimate police operation that was conducted. And then after a while, the journalists started seeing patterns, that the bodies were being placed. All of the victims were shot dead. There were no survivors at all. It was in the poorest of neighborhoods, and it was happening daily, like clockwork, all over town. I think there were more than seven per day. I'll pull up the figure later, but there was a ridiculous amount I think 30. There were around 30 a day. But obviously you couldn't get to all of the locations. But I think on average in the first few months there were like 30 people that were being killed a day. So after a while, the police realized that, actually the journalists are discovering that there are discrepancies in our story to eyewitnesses and then family reports. So when I arrived, the police had stopped giving the information. So we were going out as a group of journalists independently from the police. And then later, when the story published in December, there was a massive reaction, and the police also made it difficult for journalists to cover the crime scenes. They would collect them more. They would often take the bodies straight to the hospitals. Reuters did an amazing investigative piece where they found out that they were rushing all these bodies to the hospital, and found out that all of the bullets were like next to the heart or in the head, kind of killed execution style. And the doctor was like, look, in my whole career, I've never seen anything like this, and they're being brought back to the hospital, but pretty much dead. So I was also targeted as a massive online campaign to smear my reputation. I received hundreds of death threats. My Twitter was hacked. My Facebook account was hacked by Duterte trolls, paid trolls by the government. So they really tried to control the information that was going out and, discredit myself as a journalist. And also, the challenges that that media are having with governments as well. In just recently, in Rappler news organization in Philippines has been banned, and they're realizing now that information is key. So it even makes our job now even more challenging and harder, and we have to be incredibly specific with the information that we're reporting. We have to be double checking our sources, but now more than ever, I feel our role is, and has been for the last number of years, even more important to sort of contradict these messages that are coming from, controlled messages that are coming from governments.
Absolutely, yeah. I really hope that our friends in the Philippines, our fellow photographers, I'm always worried about them, means how are they doing, and in what difficult situations they have to work. It's not only in the Philippines, as I mentioned earlier, it's happening in all over the world, and it's
Absolutely.
in India and Bangladesh. Journalists are under threat, and they're more under threat than any time before. So these pictures are. So I had a question in a different angle too, right? Mm-hmm. As you have mentioned about David first, that as being a friend, you have received a lot of support from him, as well as you have been working with world-renowned photojournalists like John Moore, Adris Latif, David Gudenfielder. So have you in number of occasions you have worked side by side? So how did you manage to tell your own stories by maintaining your own styles, just standing side by side with the world-renowned photographers, and and then
I think the beautiful thing is that everyone has a different background, how they got into photography, and also what that means is how it's kind of honed their vision or their view. So a lot of times you can be at the same scene, but we're seeing completely different things. And also with our experience as well, a lot of times I'm reacting to things that I've seen in front of me. And a lot of times maybe I haven't seen something or someone else hasn't seen something, which then is a precursor to another event. Studying people's behavior. I mean, I really try to focus on people's emotions and behavior into trying to really, really connect with people and what they're feeling during those times, and photographing that in an extremely respectful way. Not by jumping in front of people, always kind of having some kind of whether it's eye contact or asking for permission ahead of time. All of these photographs that I've taken in the Philippines would not have been possible, all these kind of intimate moments at funerals, if they didn't know we were there, or if they did not want us there. One thing that James Naktwey once mentioned to me, we worked very closely during the Nepal aftermath of the earthquake together, and I learned so much. And he's one of the most hardworking photojournalists that I've ever come across. Paula Bronstein as well, but working with Jim was incredible because he never stopped. You know, a lot of times I know there were times in my career that I was kind of focused on, you know, light, and I was trying to be somewhere at a certain time to capture a certain mood or light. And Jim was just relentless. He would be photographing all day, all night, as much as he could. And this kind of goes back to that story from that French photographer who was like, "You have to work hard." You know, every day I would wake up in the Philippines. I would jump out of bed, or when you're sleeping in the car, you're out, and you always have that kind of that urgency or that impulse that I could be doing more. And that's kind of, you know, you have to work hard. I could be doing more sits in the back of my mind. But seeing Jim work was incredible. Everyone has like different styles and how they move in a scene as well. But yeah, I mean, I try to not think about, you know, if I am photographing with other people. I mean, obviously we try to stay out of each other's way in the backgrounds and be extremely respectful, while most importantly being respectful to the people that we're photographing, you know, in their environments. But yeah, I'm always trying to, like, you know, I think my sports background has helped kind of preempting things that may happen. And just thinking about, okay, if this is going to happen, maybe I've witnessed an emotion or reaction. If this has happened once, where do I need to be to photograph that again? And I always like think of myself, and when I'm talking to students about, you know, photographing a scene, I like to kind of challenge myself in thinking, okay, if I was like an apparition, and if I could move anywhere in this scene to cover this, you know, this one event, where is going to be the angle that has the context of where this is? You're able to catch the emotion, so balance all of those things, but where would you need to be? And so when I'm anywhere, I'm always sort of projecting ahead, like, where do I need to be? I'll walk into a room, even if it's an interview with someone, a journalist, we're interviewing a family. I'm always thinking, as soon as I walk into a room, okay, how am I going to make a photograph out of this? So it's kind of translating that to every scene. Yeah, and the more times you see other journalists working, you learn from them, and that's an amazing thing. I mean, when I lived in India, I had the honor of working with AP photographer Kevin Freya on a number of different assignments, and I remember coming back from an assignment and seeing Kevin's images and thinking, oh no, I wish I'd seen that. I wish I was from that angle. And it's always kind of just pushing yourself, and that helped me really kind of like open my mind in terms of surveying a scene, and, you know, and thinking, okay, if I'm there, what's going to be the background? What am I going to be including in the photograph? Because you know, context is all about what you include in the photograph. So yeah, I mean, it's to work with these people has been such a privilege and such an incredible experience, and you end up learning from, you know, every single time I go out, I'm learning something new.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like we always get greatest inspirations from the photographers or the fellow journalists, you know, during different assignments, different projects, and as well as how we approach our subjects too. So I think we are at the end of our conversation. So is there anything you want to mention or you want to suggest to the new photographers who want to means explored the world like you, and means travel all around the world and document the stories like you, or anyone want to be Daniel Berehulak?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing that we can do is by telling stories in our own community now. And it's by telling stories that you're passionate about that is going to make your pictures stand out. What is important is our own vision and our own narrative. And my experiences growing up have shaped me into the photographer and the person that I am. And everyone is different, and everyone has their different backgrounds, and therefore you have a unique vision. And I think that is the key thing. Following something that you're extremely important about, following a story of, even if it's documenting your friends during the time of COVID, or the political situation where you are, or if you feel compelled to learn more about the world and go travel. I really recommend you just keep on shooting and working and honing your craft, reading as much as possible, consuming as much imagery as possible as well, following people's work to get inspiration, but also being true to yourself. And I feel that if you do that, then no one can critique you. Yes, they can critique your photographic competence, but I think what is going to make people stand out is your own vision, and bringing that to a greater audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Daniel. I can't thank you enough, because you are always very busy, and we have been seeing you in different places. But I know that it takes a lot to come up with all this complete project, and all we can do, we wish you all the best, because we want to see more like incredible pictures from you, and the world wants to see more pictures from you. And I think the photographers from all around the world will be very, very inspired as well, like the way they are now. So very, very inspired by you. I think the stories and the history you are leaving behind, these are the most important thing for not only the photography world, but for our entire history. So
Absolutely.
I salute to you, and thank you so very much for your precious time. I have taken more than you have promised, right?
No, absolute pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I think it's great that you're doing a series like this, that photographers can share their stories, and hopefully be able to inspire generations of photographers to come. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and I see you somewhere sometime. Yeah.
I hope so. You take care.
Yeah. You too. Have a nice one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Your viewers, thank you for watching, and it is my constant effort to present legendary and successful photographers from all around the world, and their behind the picture stories. I will appear in the next episode with a new guest, with another spectacular photographer, and with some amazing stories. Until then, stay tuned.